Topic 6, Human Physiology, Part 14, is the first of 4 parts on hormones, homeostasis, and reproduction. This movie will provide a foundation for understanding homeostasis, as well as an introduction to hormones. The essential idea is hormones are used when signals need to be widely distributed in the body. This slide and the next provide an outline of all the movies available in the Human Physiology Topic 6 unit. Use this outline to find the movie you need. The focus of this movie can be seen on the next slide. The focus of this movie is here. You can see it's the first of 4 on hormones, homeostasis, and reproduction. The first 2 cover hormones and homeostasis, while the latter 2 cover reproduction. Let's jump in with 2 definitions. Homeostasis is the maintenance of steady internal conditions despite fluctuations in external conditions. Negative feedback is as a system changes in one direction, a mechanism within the system reverses the change. Negative feedback should be comfortable for you, as we covered the concept well early in this course. Here are the IB syllabus statements that support the definitions that I just provided in the last slide. IB syllabus: define homeostasis, define negative feedback, and lastly, state that the nervous and endocrine systems are both involved in homeostasis. Let's look at the homeostasis of body temperature and take note of the negative feedback processes at work. The body senses cold at the skin surface. The environment has changed by becoming colder, and the decrease in temperature is a stimulus. Blood vessels constrict, there would be no sweating, and thyroxine hormone is released to stimulate cell metabolism, thus generating heat. All of these responses would raise body temperature. The brain would sense the increase in body temperature. In turn, with negative feedback processes, blood vessels would dilate, sweating would occur, and thyroxine release would be inhibited. All of these responses would result in a decline of body temperature. The brain would sense the decrease in body temperature, and negative feedback processes would in turn result in raising body temperature. Here's the IB syllabus statement. State that homeostasis involves monitoring levels of variables and correcting changes in levels by negative feedback mechanisms. A stimulus produces a change in a variable. That change is detected by a receptor. The signal is sent along an afferent pathway, a pathway leading toward the central nervous system. To send a signal along an efferent pathway, a pathway leading away from the central nervous system, to an effector that reverses the initial change as a result of the stimulus. Homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant internal environment despite a fluctuating external environment, and it includes blood pH, blood carbon dioxide concentration, blood glucose concentration, body temperature, and water balance, among others. Body parameters such as blood carbon dioxide, blood pH, blood glucose, among the others, are under the control of negative feedback mechanisms, and this results in the maintenance of homeostasis. And these parameters display oscillations over time, as you can see here. The oscillations are gentle increases and decreases and increases as the negative feedback mechanisms maintain the parameter, whichever one it is, around a set point. These parameters are homeostatically controlled: blood carbon dioxide, blood pH, blood glucose, body temperature, and water balance. So that brings us to the endocrine system, which is a system principally involved in maintaining homeostasis. We can define the endocrine hormone system as a system of chemical communication involving hormones. Hormones are molecules that are secreted by ductless glands, secreting those hormones right into the bloodstream to reach target cells that have receptors. The target cells receive the hormones as a result of the receptor on the target cell membrane. In fact, the endocrine system and the nervous system together serve to maintain homeostasis. Nerves and hormones together are serving to ensure the survival of the man. So in examining the endocrine system more closely, here are the IB syllabus statements. Distinguish hormonal control from neural mechanisms of control. State that the endocrine system consists of glands that release hormones that are widely distributed in the bloodstream. The nervous system transmits electrical impulses rapidly, but the endocrine system acts more slowly as hormones travel within the bloodstream to reach their target. In this diagram, you can see endocrine glands located throughout the body. While all of these glands play an important role in maintaining body health, maintaining homeostasis, our primary focus will be on the pancreas and the glands involved in reproduction. There are a couple of other hormones in addition to those secreted by the pancreas and those involved in reproduction that I'll cover in this part or the next. In the next movie, we'll specifically look at blood glucose regulation by the pancreas. Now, relative to the nervous system, the endocrine system acts more slowly and regulates growth processes that tend to develop more slowly. And again, the endocrine system involves hormones, molecules that travel in the bloodstream. The nervous system sends rapid signals known as action potentials. So here is a diagram that displays an endocrine cell as a part of a larger gland, and the cell secretes a hormone into the bloodstream, where the hormone is carried to other locations throughout the body. The hormone is a molecule that's manufactured within the endocrine cell and is released directly into the blood through exocytosis. The nervous system employs long, slender cells that transmit an electric-like signal rapidly along the membrane, known as an action potential. In certain ways, the neurotransmitters released by neurons are somewhat like hormones, but don't confuse the term neurotransmitter with the term hormone. Here's the supporting IB syllabus statement. State that hormones are chemical messengers secreted by endocrine glands into the blood and transported by the blood to specific target cells. The target cells have receptors for the hormone. Here is another diagram that describes well the endocrine system. Hormones are released directly into the bloodstream by cells within larger organs called glands. Hormones travel within the bloodstream as molecules transmitting a signal. The signal is received by target cells as the target cell has a receptor. The target cell responds to the hormone to maintain homeostasis. One aspect of the target cell response to the hormone is to send a signal back to the original gland, often the brain, to reduce the release of the hormone. This is called negative feedback. The brain plays an important role in both the endocrine and nervous systems. The hypothalamus is responsible for monitoring many functions, thus you could say that the hypothalamus controls body homeostasis. For example, the hypothalamus monitors the temperature of the blood, water balance, hunger, and thirst. The hypothalamus secretes hormones that controls the secretion of other hormones by the pituitary gland seen here. I'll speak later about some of the hormones secreted by the pituitary. The pineal gland secretes melatonin, a hormone involved in circadian rhythms, the daily cycle of activity in animals. In this slide, the head is turned in the opposite direction relative to the last slide. Here is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls the pituitary, and both regions of the brain secrete hormones. The pineal gland, which secretes melatonin, is here. Melatonin regulates circadian rhythms, the sleep-wake patterns seen in animals. Once again, we can see the relationship between the hypothalamus and the pituitary in this slide. The pituitary has an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. The anterior lobe is true endocrine tissue, secreting hormones that it manufactures. The posterior lobe secretes hormones that are manufactured by the hypothalamus. In fact, cells from the hypothalamus stretch down into the posterior pituitary so that hormones are released from the posterior pituitary into the blood. These are called neurosecretory cells. The anterior pituitary is true endocrine tissue, secreting numerous hormones directly into the bloodstream, but under the influence of hormones released by the hypothalamus that reach the anterior pituitary through the bloodstream. In this slide, we can see that the anterior pituitary secretes various hormones, including growth hormone, which stimulates the development of bones during adolescence, and prolactin, which stimulates the manufacture of milk by mothers following the birth of a child. The anterior pituitary is responsible for stimulating the thyroid to secrete thyroxine. Thyroxine stimulates cell metabolism, thus thyroxine plays a role in body temperature regulation. And lastly, the anterior pituitary secretes both FSH and LH, two important hormones in the rhythmic development and release of an egg in female reproductive processes. Here are two relevant IB syllabus statements. Define homeostasis. Describe an example of homeostasis, which is controlled by hormones. Describe the source and roles of the hormone thyroxine, including metabolic rate and the control of body temperature. The skin senses a change in temperature, let's say cold temperatures, and sends a neural signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus responds with nervous signals to muscles to stimulate shivering, to sweat glands to inhibit sweating, and to blood vessels to constrict vessels, thus conserving heat. As well, the hypothalamus stimulates the anterior pituitary to release TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, that in turn targets the thyroid gland, stimulating the release of thyroxine. Thyroxine stimulates cell metabolism, resulting in heat production, bringing body temperature up. A classic example of how nerves and hormones serve to maintain homeostasis. Temperature receptors in the skin and in the blood send signals to the hypothalamus. In turn, the hypothalamus sends nervous signals to blood vessels, to body hairs, to sweat glands, and to muscles. And through the anterior pituitary, the hypothalamus results in the release of thyroxine from the thyroid gland. Thyroxine increases cell metabolism. In this slide, you can see the negative feedback processes related to thyroxine release. The hypothalamus senses a change in the environmental temperature, let's say cold temperatures. The anterior pituitary is stimulated by the hypothalamus to release TSH, which targets the thyroid, stimulating the thyroid to release thyroxine. Thyroxine stimulates cell metabolism and body temperature rises. As well, thyroxine and TSH feed back to the hypothalamus as molecules that results in a reduction of TSH and thyroxine release. There are conditions when our glands display damage in the form of oversecretion or undersecretion of hormones. In this image, we can see undersecretion of thyroxine. The goiter results from a dietary deficiency, specifically iodine, so that the thyroid cannot manufacture thyroxine. In turn, the thyroid attempts to compensate for the lack of iodine by enlarging. The practice of adding iodine to salt is meant to reduce the incidence of goiter. Here is a photo displaying someone whose anterior pituitary secreted an excess of growth hormone during childhood. This person suffered from the hypersecretion of growth hormone during adulthood. And that brings us to the last IB syllabus statement of this movie. Melatonin is secreted by the pineal gland to control circadian rhythms. The pineal gland is a poorly understood gland located just posterior to the hypothalamus. The pineal gland secretes melatonin, and it appears melatonin has a role to play in regulating circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms are the daily sleep-wake cycles seen in animals. However, the data on melatonin is not fully conclusive. Circadian rhythms are the physical, mental, and behavioral changes that follow a roughly 24-hour cycle, responding primarily to light and darkness in an organism's environment. They are found in most living things, including animals, plants, and many tiny microbes. Here is a graph displaying melatonin concentrations in the blood over a 24-hour period. You can see the rhythmic change in the concentration, with the peak level occurring around midnight. The circadian rhythm of pineal melatonin is the best indicator of internal time under low light levels. The melatonin rhythm is closely associated with the circadian rhythm in the need for sleep. This has led to the idea that melatonin is an internal sleep facilitator in humans, and therefore melatonin might be useful in the treatment of insomnia. Melatonin might be useful in the readjustment of circadian rhythms following travel over many time zones. In other words, melatonin is thought to be useful in overcoming jet lag. Here is the relevant IB syllabus statement. Describe the cause of jet lag and discuss the use of melatonin to alleviate jet lag. Jet lag is a temporary disruption of normal circadian rhythm caused by travel across several time zones in a short time period, resulting in fatigue, disorientation, and disturbed sleep patterns. The use of melatonin to alleviate jet lag is problematic because jet lag is poorly understood. The symptoms seem more severe when traveling eastwards rather than westwards, and when the distance traveled is longer. It also seems to affect older people more severely than younger people. Jet lag is a temporary dissociation between the body's internal clock and the environmental clock. This transient loss of synchrony means that peak alertness, as determined by the physiology of the person, does not occur at the same time as demanded by the environment. It seems that it is the daily cycle of melatonin from the pineal gland that sets up the daily cycles of many other hormones and physiological functions. Light through the eyes, acting on the pineal, then acts to synchronize the internal rhythm with the light-dark cycle of the environment, making us alert during the day and sleepy at night. Traveling across many time zones causes the melatonin profile to shift. All the more reason to think that melatonin could be used to alleviate problems associated with jet lag. Remember, jet lag is a temporary disruption of normal circadian rhythm caused by travel across several time zones in a short time period. This results in fatigue, disorientation, and disturbed sleep patterns. Melatonin use to counteract jet lag is being investigated. Is it possible to reset the body's internal clock by means of specially timed administration of melatonin? Would this counteract jet lag? It seems that the phase of the melatonin cycle can be reset by melatonin, but it's tricky because there is some confusion about whether you reset the cycle forwards by administering melatonin 1 to 5 hours after the melatonin peak, or reset the cycle backwards by administering melatonin 8 to 13 hours before the melatonin peak. And what's the dosage? As I mentioned, the symptoms seem more severe when traveling eastwards rather than westwards, and when the distance traveled is longer. It also seems to affect older people more severely than younger people. There is evidence that the administration of melatonin is able to, 1, induce sleep when the homeostatic drive to sleep is not sufficient, 2, inhibit wakefulness, and 3, to induce phase shifts in the circadian rhythm of sleep. 9 out of 10 trials found that melatonin, taken close to the target bedtime at the destination, decreased jet lag from flights crossing 5 or more time zones. The timing of the melatonin dose is important. If it is taken at the wrong time, say early in the day, it is liable to cause sleepiness and delay adaptation to local time. Not all studies support the use of melatonin to counteract jet lag, but for those studies that support the role of melatonin in counteracting jet lag, the benefit of melatonin is likely to be greater the more time zones that are crossed, and less when those flights are westward. But the pharmacology and toxicology of melatonin needs some systematic study, and the routine pharmaceutical quality control of melatonin products must be established. The effects of melatonin in people with epilepsy, as well as a possible interaction with other drugs, need investigation. Melatonin products are available over the counter. In other words, melatonin products don't require a prescription. It's difficult to be certain how much melatonin these products contain and whether other substances are present. And that brings us to the end of Topic 6, Human Physiology, Part 14. It's the first of 4 parts that cover hormones, homeostasis, and reproduction.